For the younger demographics, they don't have the same needs for free rooms. If the room's great and it's a good room, they'll pay for it. If the meal's great uh, and experiential and the food's good, they'll pay for it. Will they gamble? Sure, they do. So if you're a resort operator and you're looking at that customer, surely the value of a fully paying customer is greater than one that is expecting lots of comps, especially now when the mission is to try and bring down your operating costs.
Here are some controversial questions based on what everyone has been reading about Las Vegas. Has it peaked? Is Las Vegas quietly fading, stuck in neutral, or on the brink of an exciting revival? And if a new boom is coming, will the next wave of visitors be anything like the generations who made Las Vegas iconic? Or are we looking at an entirely new crowd ready to redefine the strip and downtown? Well, my guest puts these questions in a broader context, plus adds some strategic insights into what is actually going on. Oliver Lovat is a leading academic, researcher, writer, and CEO of Denstone Group, which offers strategic consultancy in resort development. His research topics are Las Vegas customer behavior and strategic positioning of casino resorts. He recently wrote an essay for GamingAmerica.com with the intriguing headline, Las Vegas, Everything is Terrible, or Have We Never Had It So Good? Well, let's get the full picture. For everything about Oliver, go to denstonegroup.com, and you can follow him on X. Oliver, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me, Ara. It's good to see you again.
Always a pleasure. I'd have you on even if we didn't talk about anything, just to hear your accent.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I love the Scottish accent. So it was in 2016, you wrote a paper called Elvis Who. It was a strategic approach to understanding and attracting and retaining the next generation of Las Vegas visitors. And it looks like it's that time again, in a sense. From your point of view, is Las Vegas in the doldrums? Is Las Vegas static? Or is Las Vegas on the brink of something brand new?
Uh, well, a little bit of everything, really. I think let's go back to 2016, right? I wrote a paper in 2012 which looked at customer behaviors in Las Vegas, and I noticed a marked difference between, I would call it, the under 40s and the over 40s, and this is going back to nearly 15 years. So those under 40s are now in their 40s, and what struck me was that something had to change and was going to change in Las Vegas because the needs and wants of younger customers were different from the needs and wants of then existing customers. So maybe about 6 years ago, I started to talk and research about what I felt was going to be the strategic inflection point between the shift of one customer demographic to another one. And COVID kind of accelerated that. Um, on the risk of sounding like a walking, talking um, a commentary of what's going on, but COVID meant that everything had to pivot. It had to pivot from the older customers that weren't coming into the younger customers that were. So if you look at 2022's data, granted a lot of people still weren't coming, over 50% of Las Vegas visitation was under the age of 40. And it was for a variety of reasons, and COVID, it changed an awful lot. No international, lots of Southern Californians, etc. But that was the first time the under 40s became the majority of the visitors. And for many of them, they keep coming back. And the under 40s don't have the same needs or wants than the over 40s. So when you and I first came to Las Vegas, we had an anticipation of cheap rooms, free buffets, cheap everything, as long as you gambled. Well, for the younger demographics, they don't have the same needs for free rooms. If the room's great and it's a good room, they'll pay for it. If the meal's great uh, and experiential and the food's good, they'll pay for it. Will they gamble? Sure, they do. So if you're a resort operator and you're looking at that customer, surely the value of a fully paying customer is greater than one that is expecting lots of comps, especially now when the mission is to try and bring down your operating costs. And again, on the risk of sounding like again this bulletin board, two things can be true at the same time,
Right.
as the phrase of the day goes. Yes, Las Vegas is more expensive, and yes, uh, the the demographics are changing, and some people are greater dissatisfied. But for the resort operators, this is a better customer to have than those that used to come, and therefore are happy to change the success metrics, the measurements which they judge success on. And what I mean by that is this: when I started out here 10, 15 years ago, everybody's main driver was occupancy rates. How do we make sure that we have maximum occupancy in our properties? And because the view was that ultimately hotel rooms have perishable inventory. If you don't sell your room, you're not getting any money for it. What's changed structurally and fundamentally since COVID is that resorts would rather operate on a lower occupancy level, but having the right types of customers inside. And the overall strategic approach to hospitality management operations is slightly more sophisticated now than it was pre-COVID. So we're looking to get the right customers in with higher RevPARs, higher rates, paying customers. And that's obviously, if you're a gaming customer and your play warrants a free room, that's great as well. But we'd rather have somebody in there that's, paying full price for a room than somebody who's in there paying less, not spending any money,
Sure.
etc. Even if it means running at a lower occupancy.
Sure. The profit margin is still there. It's just coming in a different way. Would you say that there's the bugaboo that those of us who have been around a while can't stand, which is paid parking? Is that a factor at all in this new customer base?
So here's the thing. I'll answer your question with a story, which is my, which is wait, what
I love it.
I was in the East Coast a couple of weeks ago, and I stayed in an average flag property where the food and beverage was terrible, I spent all my time out at the hotel, and the room was maybe 300 square foot, and it was $300. And this wasn't even a major city, right? I paid 280, $300 for a room out there. If you compare that to Las Vegas is still very good value, right? If you look at what's going on in other cities. Now, is Las Vegas more expensive than it was 15 years ago? Yes, it is. Is Las Vegas more expensive to LA or New York? Not a chance. If anything, the top dining, the top restaurants are on a par. And I think that's the difference. So people that come to Las Vegas expecting a bargain, expecting something cheap, expecting gamers to subsidize all other parts of the enterprise, will be disappointed because that is not the way it is anymore. And for many people who are choosing to spend a weekend in Las Vegas, it's not choosing between a weekend in Las Vegas of 20 years ago and now. It's choosing Dallas or LA or New York or DC or Miami, where you pay as much, if not more, for something that is not as good quality as Las Vegas.
When you looked at these figures and statistics, did you also look at the possibility that in any given market that there are would be one or two properties that would look at that situation, come to the same conclusion that you did, and yet say, you know what, we're going to distinguish ourselves by offering the quote old Vegas unquote value system. So, for example, inexpensive rooms, cheap food, free parking, etc.
Yeah, so that's a good business. It's a good business strategy. So if you look at what's going on, as I wrote in this piece, strategy exists with lots of different properties and lots of different customers, and not everybody has the same strategy. Um, so if you're operating the Wen or the Bellagio or the Cosmopolitan, you know that your customers are premium customers, and they're prepared to pay for something if it is perceived to be good value for them, and it's what they want. But the operating margins still have to exist whether you're operating an Excalibur or whether you're operating a Bellagio if you're MGM Resorts. You have to operate or try and operate as close to a profitable margin as possible. Therefore, you can't discount. And what we have seen post-COVID, whether you like this or not, and this is not a political statement, we have seen inflation, we've seen rising costs in goods, we've seen rising energy costs, and we've seen rising labor costs. And if you want to offer a discounted room, and some of the properties in the strip are still pretty cheap compared to what you get in any other market, you have to operate on a profitable margin. And in order to maintain that margin, you have to cut your costs, especially with uh, uh, rising fixed costs that you can't do anything about. And therefore, you have to cut labor. You have to, cut the concierge, things that, which don't. I mean, yeah, somebody asked me this the other day. They said, when did I last use a concierge service in a hotel? I don't think I have done for years and years. And for those customers that do want a concierge service, that is to buy something you can't get on the internet, we have casino hosts. And therefore, you're ready. If you have a casino host, you've identified yourself as a profitable customer or a valued customer, and we'll be able to get that service. So, I think we're just operating our businesses in relate to the times that we live in. And I think, to try and go and stay on the strip and try and get a room for under $100, there'll be plenty of options. If you go to LA or New York and try and get a room for under $100, God help you where you end up.
No, you're right. We always, though, those of us who live and work in Las Vegas always tend to see it from the perspective of here rather than the rest of the world, and we have to compare it. When you were looking at all the research, and again, it's a fascinating piece. So if you get a chance to go to read it, you can go to the demstonegroup.com, but the actual piece on it is at gamingamerica.com. Is there, you talked about different generations, but is there also, you talked about also doing two things at the same time, or two things can be true at the same time. If you go to a high-end property, and I've been to a few, and you look at the customer base, you almost feel that the customers don't deserve the property. What I mean by that is this, that what used to be customers, say, at a low-end casino, are showing up based on how they act, dress, etc., in high-end casinos. And I've even seen such things as, for example, Caesar's Palace, where a guest comes in, maybe they're paying top red, I don't know, but they're dragging a cooler with them. These are cultural and demographic issues that are at variance with a generational perspective, I think. What I'm observing is the customer is not the same customer that you would expect in a high-end casino. The majority of customers, not everybody. It looks like in other words, it's a mass market that is appearing in high-end casinos.
I think that was maybe more true, funnily enough, 10 years ago than it is now. If you look at what the ADRs are, well, if you look at what the hotel rates are in those top tier properties, they have never been higher and never been comparatively higher to each other. I believe the average daily rate for the Wynn last year was $555. Right, that's if you can afford to pay $555 for your average 4.4 stay, you're spending a couple of $1,000s on a room before you've done anything else. And I'm assuming you're gaming as well and spending money in the restaurants. Those operators don't really want you coming in if you're bringing your cooler, and that higher rate, scares away a lot of those customers. Funny enough, another thing as well, which I started this many, many years ago, when you look at the reviews of where people stay, the Wynn does not come across as the top property in terms of reviews, because there are many people that say this property was not for me. I felt I had to get dressed up when I went down to the pool, etc. So these properties do self-select, not just by price, but by amenities and cost of amenities as well. One of the things which I've noticed, again, this is again a post-COVID thing, is the advent of members clubs. We have, I believe, Zero Bond opening at the Wynn, the Poodle Club at Fontainebleau. There's even a couple downtown. Las Vegas was always accessible for a price. And now we're even seeing the next tier of exclusivity, which is accessibility, not necessarily based on price, but who you are, what you do. And we're adding another tier of elitism in there. So I do think there has been a bifurcation in the market post-COVID. Those which are expensive and high amenity driven and high service driven and are priced accordingly to maintain those margins, and those that are cutting costs and trying to keep the price as low as possible while maintaining a solid operating margin.
No, that makes sense. Looking at the market, you've got to price it you're right. You have to price it where your margins are going to work for you. And maybe my analysis was based on visitors traipsing through the casinos rather than guests that are staying at the casino or particular guests that are playing at high-end parts of the casino. Maybe that's where my viewpoint is skewed.
Very, very interesting. So I did a walking tour with the Leadership Las Vegas group last week. And we were talking about the evolution of casino development and how things came around. And with me was a man called Barry Shear, who worked with
Long
Miss
time. Yes,
right,
indeed.
so
Absolutely.
who worked with Mr. Wynn and Mirage Resorts and was involved with the development of the Bellagio and the Mirage, etc. And we were discussing this as we were walking through the Bellagio with, again, a group of about 30 executives. You look around the Bellagio and the place was packed. Every single space was being commercialized. There was conventions outside, the bars were all full, there were tourists walking around. And one of the questions that we said, did you think, 30 years ago when you were building, conceiving this property, that it would become such a tourist attraction? And it caused some thought, because I'm not quite sure when these things were conceived and built 30 years ago that they expected that volume of through traffic from non-customers, because that's not how Vegas was back then. And if you see, there's a complaint that the newer properties don't have the same footfall. They seem quieter, talking about Resorts World and Fontainebleau on the north part of the strip, the Wynn, which is kind of locked away again on that north part of the strip. They don't have that same throughput of foot traffic, of casual foot traffic, where Caesars, Bellagio,
Oh,
and the
particularly the Bellagio, where you see streams of people constantly coming in, and you're trying to mesh that in your mind with this luxury resort and what it offers as amenities. And it's an interesting dynamic there.
And it's something which I'm working on a project in another market just now, the day job, resort development. This is
Right.
something which we have discussed, which was, do we want to create attractions that bring people in? And if so, what types of people? Do we think that having, 10,000 people walk through a property every day to go to A to B and not spend a dime is a good business model. Now, you go back 30, 40 years ago, you wanted to get people in. You did everything you could to get people in your doors. But again, going back to what I said at the beginning, it's not just about getting people in, it's about getting the right people in. And that's kind of always been the difference between what I would call traditional hotel management and gaming casino hospitality management. In hotels, in hotels, you want to sell rooms. In casino and hospitality management, you want to get the right people in those rooms. And there's a different strategy required to do so. And you go back to Atlantic City, in the 1980s. Why was it that the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City was able to operate more profitably, more successfully with higher gaming numbers than, the other properties in the market, which had a bigger room inventory? It's because the Win team, the Golden Nugget team back then, were able to identify and target the right customers and get them in.
You mentioned earlier about the pivoting of the resorts and the casinos at a crucial time during COVID. Did they actually, based on your research and talking to people in the industry, did you find that this thinking through about pivoting happened while the casinos were shut down? And they said, what are we going to do when we reopen? Are we going to do it the same way?
So I think some of it started before, but was implemented during, and the consequence we've seen after. And what I mean by that is if you go back 15 years and strategically, the drivers of strategic competitive advantage are customer loyalty and property location. You go back 15 years and people were far less loyal. Customers were far less loyal. They were driven by price, what deal they could get. You look at customer behavior in 2021, 2022, and customers are far more loyal. You're more likely to stay in a property where you have a relationship or getting points or comps or are happy with. And especially in a competitive market like Las Vegas, which has become so segmented, you're more likely to stay in something that is designed, catered, programmed for you, no matter who you are, and something that is programmed, designed for everyone. So that the um those executives that have entered the market in the last 15, 20 years, who are MBA educated, who are, I don't want to say smarter, because there's always been smart people here, but are more trained in terms of thinking strategically, started to want to enact these policies and strategies. And COVID, when in an operations heavy environment, when there's no operations, right, it gives people a chance to think. And and it is my belief that that period gave people a time to think about the overall direction. Plus, a lot or quite a few senior executives retired round about the COVID time, and it allowed a generation who were waiting to fill their shoes to emerge. And I think one of the things that we've seen again, this whole shift, whether we call it bifurcation, whether we call it loyalty strategies, cutting costs, whatever it may be, has come up through that. But the younger guys coming, well, not so young anymore, but the next generation of executives coming in,
Right.
and enacting those strategies. Uh, And and I think also Las Vegas has also layered another level, if not another two levels. So what I mean by that is, if you go back to the 1950s, we were a place for gaming, and we had spectacle and shows and entertainment and conventions. So we've got all these layers to the gateau over decades. So you've got all the infrastructure. So what we saw is sports, and undoubtedly sports has played a major um, impact on people coming to Las Vegas, extending length of stay, bringing families, and bring your kids to the sports game. And that's only going to grow over the next 10, 15, 20 years as new teams come to market. But also they've recognized, and this has always been the case, they've recognized the value of events, whether it be, golf in the 1950s and golf tournaments and boxing, all the way through to live entertainment, unique shows. But we now have the infrastructure to put on shows like we never have before on scale. Talking about T-Mobile, talking about Allegiant, and whatever your tastes, we've gone from WrestleMania at Allegiant to AC/DC to, I think it's Tame Impala this weekend, right? Three very different customer demographics over three different weekends, all coming to Las Vegas to see those performers. And you add those, nights together, that's 250,000 people, majority of whom are coming out of market to Las Vegas. So that's different. And by the way, and the Eagles are still on, and the Coliseum's still packed, and T-Mobile's got the Golden Knights on as well, and
Right.
in the next round. So, you know, there's so many things going on which are time limited. So the difference between these types of shows and a traditional production show is, if you don't go to see AC/DC on Saturday night, they ain't going to be there on Sunday or the week after. So they're forcing customers to come and stay here. So you add all these different layers onto why people come here, um, and and they're coming. So
Yeah.
I'm less again. And most of these customers, so let me just say, are U.S. domestic customers, right? You talk about numbers and visitation in the airport. I'm sure we'll move on to that shortly, but this is still very much a domestic customer. It's meat and drink to the market, and we're doing it more efficiently, more often now in Las Vegas than we ever have done before.
I always marvel at the fact that, given where we are today, how the special events staffs of the various properties and institutions and venues can never have a collapse or get stressed out to the point that they just can't function. I don't know how they keep the pace up. It fascinates me.
I'm going to give credit to the special event staff here. I was with somebody out of market, and they were talking about putting on their event in Las Vegas, and they said, we need to move our stage here or do something. And the guys in Las Vegas were like, sure, we'll do it, and it was done. Whereas they were relaying the story, the same thing happened in Florida, and the Florida guys were like, no, that's where the stage is. You got to work your way around it. We are the best in the world at putting on these type of shows, and everybody knows it. So if you want a top quality, top grade experience, production experience, you can get it in Las Vegas. You don't have to train somebody to put on a live event. You don't have to train someone on how to do hospitality or book in 10,000 people in hotel rooms of the highest level. We can do all that here. And that's, again, when we talk about those layers of infrastructure, that's really important.
How important is transportation in terms of this new demographic that's coming in now, this new generation? Are they flying in, driving in? They're not going to
But
swim in, so
a bit of everything.
a
It's a
little
bit
bit
of
of
everything. It's a
everything.
bit,
Yeah.
but yeah, again, I, and I think, there's whatever, I'm not, again, not going into politics, but still there is a large amount of affluent experienced hunters that are international that want to come here. Um, the we have a sphere, and the sphere is a global draw. Wherever you go in the world, you say you're from Las Vegas. It used to be, tell me about the Mirage, tell me about the
Right.
Bellagio.
No, it's
Now
this
it's, tell me about the sphere. We have one of these and nowhere else does. And even if somebody else does, we'll have the first. And people are fascinated by it. It has effects. There are knock-on effects of having a sphere, on other parts of the tourist economy. But certainly, everybody's into this thing.
Do you think that, and this is kind of a side question, we only have a couple of minutes left, but I have two more questions for you. Is traffic going to be an issue for Las Vegas? For locals, I know it is in terms of going to the Strip or downtown.
Yeah, I mean, look, I always say to people, the Strip is great if you live here, but it's not for you. The Strip is an economic driver for tourism, and by all means, go stay in a hotel, have a meal, but it's an economic driver that is the envy of the world, but it's not for you, right? So,
Yeah.
you can use it, but if you don't want to pay your taxes, you want to let as many tourists come to this thing as possible, and give them as many things. And even if it means that you are, there is a room tax or whatever to try and subsidize new businesses coming here, we have to maintain our position as the leader in the global entertainment economy. Because I promise you, Dubai wants it. Macau is ready overtaking gaming. Other Universals said they're going to relocate into north of London. Other cities and places want to try and capture some of what we've got. So we need to keep innovating,
And we
and
do.
bringing people here. Sure, of course
Oh.
we do.
No, last question before I let you go, and alludes to my introduction where we talked about the possible coming boom for Las Vegas, especially with the new generations. Are you optimistic, pessimistic, or cautiously optimistic about the future of Las Vegas?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm aware, is what I'll say. There is no doubt that there is some concern about the falling off of international visitation, especially the high-end Chinese baccarat players. Now, the question is whether that is ephemeral or whether it's structural, and we don't know yet. So that is issue number one. Number two is the only correlation between Las Vegas's success is consumer confidence in the US economy. Okay, and you see the data, you watch what's going on. Their confidence is still there, but there is a question in the coming months whether if the effects of tariffs hit the economy and the economy slows down and consumer confidence is affected, whether that additional trip to Las Vegas will be justifiable. So currently now, you look backwards looking, I think we're in a pretty good spot, and I think a lot of the doom mongers are, you go out to strip at 4 o'clock in the morning and say, look, there's nobody walking. You get your Instagram clicks, but it's not reality. Um, but come back in 6 months' time when we see what's happening after the summer. Um, we see what's happening with international tourism, with tariffs. Um, and whether consumer confidence in the US is affected. It may be, it may not be. If you look at the downtown gaming numbers as a proxy in the last quarter, it was last quarter of the last month, downtown Las Vegas's gaming revenues were up double digits. And that is pretty much the American market. So, as such, if we're looking at the downtown market as a proxy of what's going on in the US, we're in good shape looking back. Whether we're the same going forward, come back to me in 3, 4, 5 months' time and I'll be able to answer. But at the moment, I cannot see any indicators to say that we're about to fall off a cliff.
Well, that's a great way to leave it. My guest has been Oliver Lovat. He's a leading academic, researcher, writer, and CEO of Denstone Group, which offers strategic consultancy in resort development. And for everything about Oliver, you can go to the denstonegroup.com, denstonegroup.com. Follow him on X. And Oliver, thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. See you next time.